Welcome to Ormond College. I'm Rufus Black, the master of the college. It is our custom to begin all formal proceedings by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and to pay our respects to their elders past and present, and to all Indigenous people here tonight. The mission of Ormond College is to form global citizens who will make a disproportionate difference in the world. And our alumni have a rich history of contributions in every walk of Australian life and far beyond. And so working here with future leaders, we see the future in terms of hope and the unprecedented historical opportunity for what those here can achieve in their lifetimes. We are clear here that in their lifetimes we can end absolute poverty on the planet. We can ensure that all people start life with a good educational and sound health care, and that we can live sustainably and much else beyond. These are not questions of technology or resources, but of will and leadership. Leadership, we recognise, that will need to come from every walk of life and every level of society. So we are particularly honoured that you've chosen to join us here tonight and for us to play host to your dinner. I welcome you all profoundly. So it is my great pleasure to introduce to you Huguette Labelle, who will be your guest speaker tonight. She is chair of the board of Transparency International, and in addition holds a number of other important positions, including being a member of the board of the UN Global Compact, a member of the group of external advisors on the World Bank governance and anti-corruption strategy, a member of the advisory group on the Asian Development Bank on climate change and sustainable development, a member of the executive board of the Africa Capacity Building Foundation, a member of the board of the Global Centre for Pluralism, a member of the Advisory Council of the Order of Ontario, Vice Chair of the Senior Advisory Board of the International Anti-Corruption Academy, a former Chancellor of the University of Ottawa. Huguette serves on additional national and international boards. She provides advisory services to the national and international organisations and has served for 19 years in the Canadian government. But it is in her role with Transparency International that we welcome her tonight. She has brought to the world's attention the corrosive impacts of corruption and how it impacts on inequality and fairness. Over the course of its life, Transparency International has had many wins, including the OECD Anti-Bribery Convention, the UN Convention Against Corruption. It has undertaken significant work in the extractive industries, the World Economic Forum, and in establishing the Open Government Partnership. And as you've been hearing today, economic growth remains fragile and pressure remains. There are 2.5 billion people living in poverty, and ridding the world of corruption is an important part of implementing sustainable development goals. To hear more about this, please join me in warmly welcoming Huguette Labelle to speak tonight.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I have a question for all of you. Given this wonderful room, given that you're so far away that I'm not sure I can see you in the back, I do see. How many of you would you like to come and give a speech this evening? Okay. Now, let me offer you a bribe. I might be able to steal a Rembrandt for somewhere. If you were to come and speak in my place, I would give it to you. Now, anybody? There you go. After a full day, as we've had, after the many speeches and the many special groups this afternoon, I know that you just want to keep on chatting. You just want to keep on having a good glass of wine and eat. So I do not quite apologize for being in between your meal and your wine. Well, no, your wine you can continue to have. But I'd like to make some comments this evening and was very pleased to have been invited. We've heard today from so many individuals about the dire challenges that our world is facing. And one of the greatest challenge, not the only one, of course, is to ensure that global economic growth is sustainable and is inclusive, and that all the citizens of our countries have a decent quality of life, not just for now, but for the future and for their descendants. And there are a number of issues that I would like to comment on that were raised today. And of course, our work in preparing the kind of recommendations that we want to make to the G20 is so important. And what was fascinating is that all of us have specific areas of expertise, specific issues that we are living for every day, that we believe in. And yet, we are all there, ready to work together, because we've recognized the interrelationships between all of these. Nothing is isolated one from the other. And I think that this gives us such a different strength and more power to be able to influence the world leaders, in particular the G20 at this time, but many, many others. The G20, as it's in its dual focus this year on economic growth and resilience of the financial system and future shock, preventing future shock, I think a key question for us to consider is, if we're talking of economic growth, who benefits from this growth? Oxfam told us this year that just 1% of the world's population controls nearly half of the planet's wealth. 70% of the world's people live in a country where income inequality has increased in the last 3 decades. And there's some interesting statistics about the US, but I think it could apply to other countries as well. And that is that the gap between rich and poor has grown at a faster rate than any other developed countries in terms of the US, where the top 1% captured 95% of post-recession growth in the last few years. That's since 2009, while the 90% of Americans became poorer. And as I said, we're talking of one country. I'm not sure it's that different elsewhere. So this disparity, not only does it leave a lot of people behind, but it means that more people have less power to influence, because those who are poorer, as we know, don't have the same kind of power to influence as those who have a lot of resources and a lot of money, and therefore are much more powerful. And there are organizations in this room that have been working for decades to break the poverty cycle and ensure a country's sustainable development wherever you are. There are organizations here who are operating at the international level, of course, many of us are, at the national level, but we also have those who are operating at the community level. And it's that wonderful link between the local community right up to the international that I think makes our groups so important, because we're able to be informed by the reality that is on the ground. And it's that reality that we bring to the leaders of the G20 and others. I think another challenge that we have is to reduce the vulnerability of those in poverty to abuse of power. It's often the poor who are the most exposed to abuse in public services and in legal systems. As some of you know, we do a barometer, which we call the People's Survey, every year. And the last one, we were able to reach 114,000 people in 107 countries. And what we found is that in most countries, 1 person out of 4 said that they had to bribe to access essential services like health, education, water, licensing. In some countries, it's 3 out of 4. And these are people who have very often incomes of less than $1,000 a year. And if you pay 30 to 40% in bribes, there's not much left for food for your family. The issue here as well, as we've heard today, I think relates to youth. And when you have countries, I'm thinking of Yemen, for example, where 73% of the population is below 25. Many countries, it's 50% or more even. And when you look at young people between the age of 13 and 25, and I'm sorry men, but especially boys between that age, who are not at work, who don't have any livelihood, who are not in school, what do you think will happen to them once they've learned to live on the street, or once they become an extension of those criminal bodies who can offer them something in terms of food and money? So, the marginalization of youth, I think, is something that we have to look. Because in our societies, let's take the Western world, we say, 20-25% of youth are unemployed. That's just the official figure. When you really look at the real figures behind, I think it's very often much more than this. And I'd like to say a word about women, because in so many countries, women are not able to take their rightful place as in the economy, their rightful place in leadership, especially at national, subnational level, or in industry. When we look around the world at the top 500 companies, less than 10% of board members are women. I don't know whether you've ever looked at the UN Assembly picture every year. There are a lot of suits. There are not many women on that picture, still today. A few more. So, when we're looking at equality, equity, and using the brain power and the capacity of everyone in our communities, these are 2 groups that are left behind and that we must do something about. I'd just like to say a few words about the environment and climate change, because this is so vital to our future, to the sustainability of the planet and of our communities. And when we look at the growth of our population, 9 billion, 2050, that's tomorrow. When we look at what's happening in terms of urbanization, again, more than 50% now of our current people living in cities. Greater Tokyo, 50 million in about 3 years from now, to say nothing of Shanghai and a lot of those big cities. But the big issue here is around 1 billion people. 1/3 of the world's urban population lives in slums. Again, not the kind of world we want to see. And many of you have been, of course, looking at the IPCC's reports, the kind of evidence that comes out there, the impact of climate change on our weather, on food security. And I keep thinking of, the delta in Vietnam, where the rice is grown for a lot of our population. If I look at Bangkok, if I look at all our coastal cities, if I look at the Pacific Islands, a few feet more of water will do a big difference. And, about, I won't say how long, yes I will, about 20 years ago, myself and my children were in Banff National Parks in the Rockies in Canada. And we sat on a bench and got a picture taken, and behind us was one of the glaciers. So 15 years later, a few years ago, we went back, and my children said, were very adults at this time, said, why don't we sit on the same bench and take a picture? Of course, we never thought of the glacier. And then when I looked at the 2 pictures, 15 years, that last picture of 15 years after the first, half of the glacier was gone. And that's just in, southern Alberta. And to say nothing of what's happening in the far north, in both extremes of our world. So, this is one thing that we are leaving aside at our own peril, and that we have to find better ways of convincing our leaders that something must be done with this. I'd just like to say a few words about the infrastructure, because we know that in many of our countries, people do not have access to water, they do not have access to electricity, to health, to education, but if looking just at the physical infrastructure, Ernst & Young estimates that we have a need for about, let's say, 57 trillion of essential infrastructure around the world in the next 15 years. And of course, that is important. It's important for people to be able to have a living. It's important for the so-called GDP growth of the countries. But it's also basically important to be able to bring, hopefully, good investment to countries around the world that need it badly. But if I looked at the corruption issue, procurement and construction are one of the most vulnerable areas for corruption. And in a number of cases, it can cost 30 to 40% more because of the massive bribe that was paid to get the contract, especially on big contracts, or because of collusion. It's each our turn to have a contract. And of course, the cost keeps escalating, and then people wonder how we can do so little with so much. But we're talking here of the people's money. So I'm glad to see that procurement is on the agenda of the G20, and I think all of us hopefully will continue to work together on that. One of the areas that we've been working very hard on, and with the anti-corruption working group of the G20, has been on illicit financial flows from all of our countries, but especially from continents like Africa. And if we look at various illicit flows like tax evasion, money laundering, bribery, and proceeds of other illegal activities, and that can be illicit trade in drugs, in arms, it can be sextortion with young people, and so on. The scale of black money leaving developing countries could be set at almost 6 trillion over the last decade, 6 trillion American dollars. And that the worst part is that according to GFI, illicit financial flows from developing countries have increased at an average rate of 10% per year. So it's not going down, it's going up. Latest figures, 2011, was 1 trillion of such illicit flows just from developing countries. So this is an area that, of course, we need to, again, work on together. And there is a lot being done in that respect, but not enough and not quickly enough. And some of the things that we, along with a number of partners, are pressing the G20 is, of course, to have tax transparency from the business sector, but to also ensure that there are multilateral cooperation between all countries to exchange information when there are persons that are of interest, when there are bona fide investigations, which right now is not happening. And therefore, the multilateral exchange of information, which the OECD is being worked on, is very important for all of us, because all of us suffer from tax evasion. We all suffer from having these illicit flows coming to our borders. They're not only going to fiscal havens, they're coming to our banks. They're coming as equity into our companies. And this is why, as a second point, we are also working hard to get the G20 to agree to a public register for all countries to have public registers of the beneficial owners of companies and trusts. But especially we're working more right now on companies, and we've launched a campaign in this respect. Global Witness is also working on this in a very big way. And this is because if we improve the banking sector, where the banking sector will be more diligent in not taking money from people who have, are stealing assets and trying to launder it, then those people will look for other places. And a good place to hide will be in equity ownership in companies and building trusts. So that if you don't deal with that one, I think we're just opening the door to really more and more problems. And what we're also telling the G20, and some of us are doing that together, the Anti-Corruption Working Group, is please involve the developing countries. Involve them now as standards are being set by the OECD for the G20. Involve the developing countries, because that's another place. As you close areas where people can hide their illicit gains, they will find other places. And if you're not ahead of the game, they will just keep on moving around the world. Another point that I would like to raise relates to the extractive sector. We all have, or most of us anyway, have extractive companies within our countries who operate worldwide. Some of them are very large, others are not as large, but you find them where the resources are. And right now, a lot of the resources are in Latin America, but a lot of the unexplored and exploited resources are in Africa as well. So what we see a need is for all extractive companies to publish everything they pay to governments, where they are, country by country, project by project. We want them to also publish their operation information, their net profit, so that the people of the country know that as the wealth is going out from their soil, that the return on that is there and is happening. And if a community is not getting that result, then they have to look to their national government and hopefully be able to demonstrate that they need some of that, of those resources for their own development. And actually, things are moving in this regard. The EU has passed legislation exactly saying what I'm saying, and by 2015, all EU countries will need to have legislated what the EU legislation has asked for, which is the reporting in the way that I just mentioned. So, what we want is for all G20 countries to also give themselves that kind of legislation, because some of them are not in Europe, obviously. We want also the G20 countries to join EITI, because it's not just what the company pays, but what the governments receive. So you can match, you can see publicly what is happening there. Just like to say a few words about the governments and accountability, in particular of the G20, and what I think will be important for all of us working together will be to seek that accountability, seek the commitments. Many commitments have been made, but they have to be turned into actions, and they have to be turned into actions that work, and people in our countries need to know what these are and need to be able to follow that accountability line. And I think the C20, would be very important in this regard. And when I was in the Canadian government, I was always amazed how very often the Ministry of Finance, when there was a decision to reduce expenditures, either because there was a deficit or whatever, there was always only the benefit of reducing services, because that's what it is very often, as opposed to having the other side of the ledger and the cost of doing that. And, if you're putting people on the street because you're reducing significantly the number of public servants as well as the cost of delivering services, at the same time, there is an inherent cost that can be as much as, if not more, even within a few years, than the original perspective that was presented. So I think that when we're looking at governance, we need to look at the accountability of leaders, and that is becoming increasingly important to deal with the deficit of trust that we have in our countries. And when we do our surveys, when we've asked, for example, the last time, do you think that your governments are being effective in fighting corruption? And there was a dramatic reduction, even, I think it's down to something like 16% thought that their governments were effective in fighting corruption. So, and then, of course, the whole issue of parties, political parties, making a lot of promises during elections, and then after they sort of wither on the vine. Not always, but sometimes. So, you know, we of course have to deal with those and to work with the G20 in ensuring that the agenda that they will hopefully adopt based on the recommendations of the C20 and some of the other groups, that they will be able to agree to demonstrate how they will be implementing them and what, in what time and what the results will be. You know, today we heard about the world and its problems. I'm not doing much better tonight in talking about those problems, but also hopefully a little bit about what can be done. But in a way, we've also heard about the world that we want. The world that we want for all our citizens. And that world is one where there is a decent quality of life for all. There is access to essential services, health, education, water, energy, that there is food security, that there is respect for human rights, that people can live in security and peace in their community, in their countries, and with governments who recognize that their responsibility is to manage the public good, and that the resources that they manage are the people's resources, not their resources. The information that they hold is the people, belongs to the people, and therefore people should not be on their knees begging for that information. It should be made available to all easily. The web is one of the best places to do that. And I think as well that what we want is a place in our communities, in our governments and globally where the rule of law predominates, and that people feel that there are not two kinds of laws. One for those who might have parliamentary immunity from being convicted as long as they're parliamentarians, and the rest of the world. Or that those who are very rich can, of course, appeal forever, while those who are not don't have that possibility. So, you know, as societies and individuals, I also feel that as I was listening today, that we need to nurture the kind of values that should transcend our global community. And that is the basis for all the other specific actions. And one where sharing and caring is one of those values, where fairness is part of it, where transparency and integrity is there, where participation of people in what affects them in their community, in their country, is also there, and where accountability is present. I believe that the strength of this group, its capacity, demonstrated capacity to work together and build and develop the agenda that is evolving right now, I think can have a tremendous impact on the lives of our people around the world, and that we can, as a group, make sure that the G20 not only receives those, but also acts on those resolutions, on those recommendations. So we will continue our work tomorrow. Thank you for your time this evening, and let's keep moving. We need it, the world needs it, and I think we are a very powerful force as we work together. Thank you.
you.